All right, everyone. It's a couple minutes after 6, so we'll go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to the Public Information and SEPA Scoping Meeting for State Project Number 01150122 for the replacement of the retaining wall along Route 44 in the town of Putnam. My name is Shelley Plude. I'm a project manager with SLR. We're the consultant that's been retained by Connecticut DOT to perform the design for this project. I'm going to start with a quick meeting overview. We've got a few housekeeping things that we have to go through as far as meeting accessibility and how to submit questions. Then we'll go through our team introductions, followed by an overview of the SEPA process, which this project has to go through. And then we'll get into the details of our presentation, discuss the existing conditions, the purpose and need for this project, and then go into our proposed recommendations. Once our presentation is over, we'll go into a Q&A session. So this project is subject to Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. No person shall, on the basis of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation or subject to discrimination in the development of this project. There is a voluntary post-meeting survey. You can access that by scanning the QR code on your screen or by accessing the following link, which I'll read out loud for anyone who's here via phone only. That link is https://portal.ct.gov/CTDOT survey. There's additional civil rights information available on https://portal.ct.gov/DOT/office-of-equity/vi-page. Those links will be posted in the chat as well. A recording of this presentation will be posted to CTDOT's YouTube channel after the event. Closed captioning, including non-English translation options, are available on Zoom and YouTube. On your screen is a more detailed notice regarding the Title VI requirements. If you have any complaints that you wish to make regarding Title VI, you can do so via one of the methods here on the screen. I'm going to leave this up for a moment in case anyone needs to access this information. This is that same notice for anyone who needs a Spanish language translation. Again, I'll leave this up for a few moments. If you need closed captioning or subtitles, that is available in Zoom. To access those, click Show Captions at the bottom of your screen, click the speaking language, and then select the language you would like from the list shown. Closed captioning, including non-English translation options, are available on YouTube after the event. There are a number of ways that you can submit questions. You can submit questions via email. That email address is dotproject0115-0122@ct.gov. You can also submit questions by phone. That number is 860-594-2020. If you leave a voicemail, please reference the project number. That's 0115-0122. If you require a callback, please make sure to leave your contact information. And then lastly, you can also submit questions via the Q&A chat in Zoom, and we'll go over that in a moment. There is also additional information available on the project webpage that is located at https://portal.ct.gov/DOT Putnam 0115-0122. And the comment period will be open to August 16th. So for anyone wishing to submit questions via the Q&A tool that is located at the bottom of your screen, select the Q&A tool icon. The window will open as shown here. and then type in your question and hit enter. If you're joining by audio only, you can dial *9 to raise or lower your hand. Now introducing our project team. So as I mentioned, my name is Shelley Plude with the design consultant for the department SLR. The DOT team is led by Sebastian Canamella, principal engineer with CTDOT Highway Design. With him is Meredith Andrews, who is the DOT project manager, and assisting them is Hasib Ahmad, project engineer. Also on the call with us is Matt Giannakopoulos with DOT Rights of Way and Kevin Fleming with the Office of Environmental Planning. And I'm actually going to turn things over to him so that he can discuss the SEPA process, which this project is going through.
All right, great. Thanks, Shelley. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Kevin Fleming, and I'm a transportation planner at the Connecticut DOT in the Office of Environmental Planning. And as mentioned, we're here tonight for a joint public informational SEPA scoping meeting. But what does that mean exactly? Well, the Connecticut Environmental Policy Act, or SEPA, establishes a process for the various Connecticut state agencies to follow to identify and review state actions that may have a significant effect on the environment. And it also allows us to evaluate alternatives to avoid or minimize any potential impacts. Now, one of the most important components of the SEPA process, and I can't stress this enough, is the public's opportunity to review a proposed action and give us feedback. So your comments here tonight and throughout the entire public comment period, which expires on Friday, August 16th, is a really critical part of the SEPA review process. So under SEPA, we have to consider the impacts that a project may have in a really wide range of environmental resources. And although what you see here isn't necessarily an all-encompassing list, this slide should give you a pretty good idea of the types of resources that we have to consider under SEPA. As you can see, we look at everything from cultural resources and air quality to endangered species and socioeconomic resources. And for this project, actually, because this project involves federal funding through the Federal Highway Administration, or FHWA, we have to look at it through a federal lens as well and ensure compliance with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. All right, so now that you have a really general idea of what SEPA is and the types of environmental resources that we do have to consider under it, what exactly is meant by the term scoping? Scoping does have a really specific definition under SEPA, and the process involves a defined set of steps for public outreach. As you can see here, SEPA scoping is defined as the gathering and analysis of information that a state agency will use to establish the extent of environmental review for a proposed state action. So basically, it's really just a way for us to get information from the public and the other state agencies so we can determine the proper level of environmental review and also the proper level of environmental documentation needed for each project. Now, this process begins once we publish a notice of the project in the Environmental Monitor, and then that kicks off a minimum 30-day public comment period. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Environmental Monitor, I'm assuming most of you are not, it's a biweekly online publication that's run by the Connecticut Council on Environmental Quality, otherwise known as CEQ. And its purpose is to inform the public of the various projects that go through the SEPA process. Essentially, it's like a database or a SEPA clearinghouse. So for this project, that scoping notice was published on Tuesday, July 16th. Now, I mentioned before, the comment period will run until the close of business on Friday, August 16th. Overall, the scoping process really helps us identify any potential alternatives. It also helps us identify any specific environmental resources that need to be analyzed in the project area. So obviously, as you know, often the local community has a really unique understanding of the project area, and that includes any community concerns or any issues that we just may not be aware of. And then ultimately, this process helps us determine if significant environmental impacts are present, which would then require us to undertake an environmental impact evaluation, or an EIE. So an EIE is a really detailed and comprehensive document that analyzes various project impacts. It also compares the impacts of any alternatives considered on a project. Okay, so here is just a very high level chart of the SEPA process. It shows where we are currently, and those are the boxes outlined in red, and then it shows what the next steps are under SEPA. So just an FYI for this particular project, we have to undergo SEPA scoping because the project will result in an adverse effect to historic properties. The retaining wall that's being replaced is actually a contributing element of the Cargill Falls Mill, and the Cargill Falls Mill is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So because of this, we've been coordinating with the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office and also with the Federal Highway Administration to develop an agreement document that outlines the specific mitigation measures required for us impacting the historic resource. So after after the scoping period ends on August 16th, next steps will be we'll go ahead and review all of the comments received. We'll consider any environmental impacts and then determine if an EIE is required or not. And then once that determination is made, that determination itself and the justification behind it will be published again in the Environmental Monitor, along with a synopsis of the comments received and our responses to those comments. Then this will inform the public that we have either concluded the SEPA process or that we will be doing further analysis in the form of a formal EIE due to the presence of significant environmental impacts. All right, so that's it for me regarding the SEPA process. Appreciate your time. Thank you all very much. And now I'll hand the presentation back over to Shelley.
Thank you, Kevin. So now we can get into the nitty-gritty details of why we're here, which is to replace a portion of the existing retaining wall along Route 44 in the town of Putnam. The project site's located on the western side of town. The wall itself runs along the north side of the Cargill Falls Mill property and directly supports Route 44. The project limits will be primarily between High Street and Church Street for the wall replacement and some roadway work, but we are also extending a sidewalk replacement down to roughly 100 feet or so north of Sabin Street to address the condition of the existing sidewalk. Now zooming in on the wall actually extends for the majority of the length of the north side of the Cargill Falls Mill property. We are proposing to replace roughly 340 feet of that wall, which is shown here in red. This is the portion of the wall that directly supports the roadway above. The portions shown here in blue are the portions of that existing wall that will remain. While we're here looking at the mill, I wanted to acknowledge the operations of the mill facility, which is currently a mixed-use residential and commercial property. We have the main entrance to the mill, which is just north of Church Street, which feeds into a small parking area and then leads into a one-way travel lane around the north side of the mill, which does eventually connect to the parking at the rear, and then a secondary entrance further south on Route 44. I wanted to point out two locations that are going to be important moving forward. We have two what we're calling pinch points where the wall is in very close proximity to the mill building. So on the north side of the mill, we have a pinch point that's just over 11 feet, 11'3". And then on the south side, we have another pinch point. It's a little bit wider. It's about 11'7". And that's going to factor into the construction of the wall and our various alternatives. So some existing conditions photos. The photo on the left here is Route 44 facing northeast. So just to kind of orient everyone, the wall is on the right side here, roughly where that fence line is. We have an existing sidewalk above the wall, existing overhead utilities also above the wall. Another feature I want to point out about this site is that we have a second set of retaining walls along the north side of the road. Those walls are not included in the scope of this project. They do roughly represent the limit of the state's right-of-way on the north side of the road. You can see those here as well in the photo on the right looking southeast. So that wall roughly is the limit of the right-of-way, and then we have the wall here, which just emphasizing the relatively narrow space that we have to work on this project. Now the wall itself is primarily a dry stack stone wall. There are some mortared masonry sections. On the right side here, you can see that first pinch point, which is roughly 11'3". The wall height here is about 14 feet. The wall increases in height to roughly 30 feet or so at the southern end of the mill, which is where we have that second pinch point. That's about 11'7". Now, the reason why we're replacing this wall is because it is in poor condition. We do have a section of the wall that is bulging. We also have a number of cracked stones and then sediment which is coming through the wall between the voids and the stones. That sediment movement is contributing to some settlement above the wall. You can see in the left-hand photo and the center photo that the sidewalk above the wall is settling. We've got a low point here, some cracking in the pavement that's a result of that settlement. And contributing was there was a water main rupture at a hydrant a number of years ago, which resulted in a loss of material behind the wall. And these photos are from that repair by the department a few years ago. Now, in addition to the wall and the other site constraints, we do have quite a few utilities out here. So we have an existing water main, which is owned by the town of Putnam in the eastbound lane or the south side of the road behind the retaining wall. We have a sewer main also owned by the town in the westbound lane on the north side of the road. We have a gas main, which is generally runs along the sewer main. And we also have an extensive network of overhead utilities, which are located primarily above the wall with a number of service connections to those properties on the north side. And last but not least, we have an underground telecommunication duct, which runs along the edge of pavement on the north side of the road. So all in all, we have quite a few utilities that we're going to be working with and working around, and I'll get into those impacts later on in the presentation. Now this cross section helps visualize how close everything is. So the wall is identified here in gray. You can see how close we are to the existing mill building, particularly at that southern end there where the wall is the tallest. We have the overhead utilities, which are directly over the wall, the water main, which is in close proximity, and then we have that gas, sewer, and telecommunication duct bank in pretty close proximity to one another, and then that second set of retaining walls on the high side. And then just to emphasize how tight our construction site will be here, this is from some utility work that was being done on the mill several months ago. This is the tighter of the two pinch points, that 1'3". This is not going to be altered under this project. This portion of the wall on the right side of the photograph here is proposed to remain. We're replacing roughly from that angle point down. So this pinch point will remain. Now, as Kevin mentioned, we are obviously aware that the Cargill Falls Mill is a historic complex, founded in 1806, is listed on the National Register. And as Kevin said, the wall itself is not included in that listing, but it is considered a contributing element to the site. And as a result, the project has received a adverse effect determination. So what that means is that we will have certain mitigations that we'll have to do throughout the course of the design. Some of that will include considering the nature of the site when determining developing some aesthetic treatments, and then documentation, namely photo documentation of the existing wall by a historical consultant prior to the wall being removed. As a part of this project, we also looked at the crash history on Route 44 to see if there were any concerns with the roadway. Over the last 3 years, so from 2020 to 2023, there were 2 crashes identified at the High Street intersection and a total of 4 crashes identified at the Church Street intersection. This data didn't produce any notable trends or indicate any potential concerns with the roadway configuration, so there will not be any alterations to the road, major alterations to the road or the adjacent intersections. Now, for the proposed roadway work as a part of this project, I'll get into the wall in a little bit more detail in a moment. We're proposing to reconstruct roughly 500 feet of Route 44, again, between High Street and Church Street. And then we'll mill and overlay the Church Street intersection. Included in that roadway work, we'll be installing a series of 4 catch basins. Under existing conditions, there is not much in the way of drainage between High Street and Church Street, so we'll be introducing some catch basins here, and then connecting that to an existing system that's north of Church Street. The sidewalk within the roadway reconstruction limits is going to be replaced with a sidewalk that'll be a consistent 7 feet wide. That's to accommodate sufficient space behind each of the utility poles, which are located in the sidewalk. And then we'll be extending that sidewalk reconstruction down Route 44 for just under 800 feet to address the existing condition of that walkway. Because of the impacts to the mill when we're removing and replacing the wall, we will be repaving a portion of that mill travelway, and we'll have some incidental driveway apron reconstructions and minor sideway work. Now, as for the wall itself, the replacement will begin just past where the wall begins to curve away from Route 44 on the southern side of the wall and extend roughly to where that previous photo showed the wall beginning to flare away from Route 44. The proposed wall is going to be a precast concrete modular wall, which means that it'll arrive on site in prefabricated pieces that'll then be assembled on site. At each end of the wall, we'll be rebuilding a short section of the existing stone just to tie into that new wall. And then on the northern side, we have a short stretch of cast in place concrete wall to retain a small grade differential between the sidewalk and the parking area for the mill office building. So on the left here is a typical section of the proposed wall. So you can see the concrete blocks that are going to be assembled to construct the wall. The wall will be topped with a concrete parapet and fence. One important thing to note here is that because we are looking at a wall that is pretty substantial in height, roughly 14 to up to 30 feet in height, we will have pretty significant excavation. And so in order to confine that excavation, we're going to be installing what's called a temporary earth retaining system. So as the wall is being removed, this temporary system will be installed. In order to support the excavation, it'll have a series of tiebacks or anchors that'll extend into the soil beyond, and that'll come into play a little bit later on when I talk about our property impacts. And then on the right here is that cast in place wall that I referenced. So this is where there's that small parking area associated with the Cargill Falls Mill office building. You can see there's a slight grade differential, 2 to 3 feet here. So we have a short wall just to retain that and keep the grade at the sidewalk and the roadway level. We will have quite a few utility impacts. So as I noted earlier, there are a lot of utilities within the corridor, and we will be impacting a number of them. So the overhead utilities will be relocated twice. Right now they are on the south side of the road. They will be temporarily relocated to the north side. Once the wall construction is complete, they will be relocated back to their current location. Both the water and sewer mains will be replaced as a part of this project. During construction, they'll both be temporarily bypassed. And then once the wall is complete, they'll be reconstructed generally in their current alignments. We'll also have some minor impacts to the gas and telecommunications lines through resetting of valves and manhole resetting. And this graphic will just walk us through what those utility relocations may look like. So the overhead utilities will be shifted to the north side of the road as shown. Then the water and sewer will both be temporarily bypassed around the construction site. Once the wall is completed, the water and sewer will be rebuilt, generally in their existing alignments, and those overhead utilities will also be restored to the south side of the road. Now, because we are going to have to encumber the majority of the road to build this wall, we'll be excavating the majority of the eastbound lane in order to remove the existing wall and install the new one. We'll have very limited space above the wall or below at the Cargill Falls Mill, so we are proposing to close the road during construction. We'll have two detours. One will be a local detour via Kennedy Drive to Bridge Street to Recreation Park Road, and then down Sabin Street. It's roughly a 1.6-mile detour. And then we also have a regional detour. So to capture truck traffic that's moving through the area, they'll be diverted onto Route 171, 169, and that's roughly a 5.8-mile detour. Because our construction site is so tight, we do have a number of rights-of-way impacts. So I'm going to go over some of the specifics of that first, and then I'll turn it over to Matt to discuss the formal process. But we do have a couple of what we call sliver takings. So we have a couple of locations where the existing sidewalk or the proposed sidewalk just clips the limit of the right-of-way. So we'll have a couple of locations where we want to do a very minor taking in order to address that right-of-way issue. So one of those is located, this is that secondary or the rear entrance to the mill complex and the property adjacent to that. You can see that very small area where the sidewalk clips the right-of-way line. And then the second location where we have that condition is on the southern side of the mill and the adjacent property where the existing sidewalk does go over the right-of-way line. We have a number of temporary and permanent easements as well that I'll go into more detail on the next slide. All in all, we're affecting a total of 14 properties. So on the existing Cargill Falls Mill, we do have an existing maintenance easement in favor of the state. That's shown here on the screen in this yellowish color. We'll be expanding that easement to encumber the entirety of the wall that's being replaced. That's shown here in the darker orange. And now in order to make sure that the state has the ability to access their easements, we'll be obtaining an access easement, which is shown here in green, that just allows the state to access the easements so that they can maintain the wall. In addition to those permanent easements, we'll have a number of temporary construction easements. So on the north side of Route 44, these construction easements are largely related to the overhead utility relocations. Those are going to be put on the low side of those secondary retaining walls, but there will be an aerial trespass of the overhead lines. And then we also have, I mentioned the temporary earth retaining system and the anchors for that. We'll have an underground encroachment onto some of the properties on the north side. That's also the case here on the southern side of the wall. And then because the work area is so limited, we'll be obtaining a construction easement from the mill as well to be able to complete this work. And I will pass things over to Matt so that he can talk about the actual rights of way process.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. I'm Matt Giannakopoulos. I'm a project coordinator with the department's Division of Rights of Way. It is our office's responsibility to acquire the property rights that are needed for transportation projects. So as Shelley just outlined there, the proposed project design would require the acquisition of some property rights. So I'm here tonight to just expand on that a little bit and give a brief rundown of our process. So first, I'll just elaborate a little bit. When we refer to partial taking, we're referring to a situation where the department needs to acquire a small portion of a property, in this case, just that narrow strip along the frontage. And when we refer to easements, that is a type of property right that the department acquires when it needs to use private property for a specific purpose, such as access or specified construction activities, but it doesn't need to own the property outright. Yeah, so when I refer to property rights, I'm referring to both partial takings, partial acquisitions, and the easements that Shelley just outlined. Any necessary property rights that are required for the project will be acquired in accordance with Connecticut General Statute sections 13A-73, 13A-98E, and whenever there is federal money used in any phase of a project, the department must adhere to the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970. So once the design has progressed to the point where we know exactly the property rights that we need to allow the project to move forward and we're ready to begin the acquisition process, each impacted property owner will receive a letter of intent to acquire from our office, along with a property map, which will depict the exact rights to be acquired. At that point, our office will determine the fair market value of those property rights, and we use that to establish an offer of just compensation. That offer then gets sent out to the property owner in writing, and a right-of-way agent from our office is available to meet with the property owner, and they can explain in detail the project, the impact to that particular property, and explain how the department came up with that offer. The property owner would have a reasonable time to consider the offer and enter into negotiations. Once an agreement is reached, the DOT will prepare all the necessary paperwork to transfer those property rights, and they'll file a deed and the property map on the town land records. However, if negotiations reach an impasse, in order to allow the project to move forward, the department may acquire the rights it needs through its power of eminent domain. And what happens in that event is the department files a notice in the local superior court, along with a monetary deposit in the amount of the department's offer of just compensation. The property owner would have 6 months from that date to file an appeal if they thought that the state's offer was inadequate. Now, whether or not the owner chooses to use their right to appeal, they can apply to the court to withdraw that deposit at any time. So I know a lot of times when people hear eminent domain, they think it means that the state can just take your whole property for $1 and things like that. But that's not the case. The owners would be entitled to at least that original offer of just compensation, and the department can only take title to the property rights that it needs to allow the project to move forward. Once the project is completed, the DOT files an affidavit on the land records, and that'll release any temporary construction easements that were required for the project. So that was just my brief overview of our process. I'll be here to answer any questions during the Q&A. In the meantime, I'm going to give it back to Shelley to conclude the presentation.
Thanks, Matt. So just to wrap things up, the total proposed construction cost of everything that we've discussed here today is coming in at just over 10 million. The construction will be funded jointly by 80% federal dollars with a 20% state match. We are currently in preliminary design, so the design completion date is proposed to be December of 2025, with the project being advertised for bid in January of 2026, followed by a construction start time in May of 2026. As of right now, we're anticipating a total construction duration of about a year, and the anticipated duration of the road closure is about 8 months. The reason for the length of that closure, we have to remove the existing wall, replace it, and then we have all of the utility relocations and reconstructions that I discussed earlier, and the roadway work. So all of those activities will be taking place over the course of that closure. And that's going to conclude our presentation. So again, you can visit our project webpage for any additional information to view some of our project plans. The comment period, as mentioned, is open until August 16th, so you can submit questions after this meeting, and you can send us questions via email, phone, or in the Zoom Q&A. So that will conclude our presentation, and I will open up the Zoom Q&A instructions for anyone who wishes to submit questions that way. I don't think we have any questions in the chat as of right now, so we'll just give it a few minutes for anybody who might be on. And again, you can submit them at any time via email or phone if things come up after the meeting. And I'll go back to that information for anybody who wishes to submit questions that way.
So Shelley, there is a question.
Yep. Okay, I see a question that's come in. Any chance that the sidewalk can be extended to Day Kimball Hospital? That's not included in the scope of this project. There's a number of reasons for that. There's some challenges associated with the grading to extend it over the bridge and beyond. So that'll have to be a conversation at some point in the future between the town and the state if there's an interest in extending the sidewalk further, but it is not going to be included in this current project. Okay, I think we've seen a couple more questions come in. So the first one, will we be notified, presumably through management, of service interruptions to utilities ahead of time? I'm going to guess that you're in the Cargill Falls Mill property just based on the question. We're still in the very early phases, so we'll be coordinating with the utilities going forward as far as how they're going to handle their relocations. But we can work with the mill on that issue. And I see a question. I know that there is a bus stop in front of Church Street. Will that be affected? We'll have to look into that further because of the detour it is going to be difficult to get buses to Church Street, so we'll have to work with the local transit authority on some alternatives for that.
That's another question, Shelley. I don't know if you saw
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Yep. Will we be able to access the sidewalk going out from the east entrance of the mill towards Kennedy Drive? So that's the, I'm just going to go back to the screen, but so the main entrance to the mill is going to remain open. It just won't be accessible through traffic down that one-way travel way. And I'm just trying to get to a screen so that I can show what we're talking about. So looking at the sidewalk going out east, yes, this sidewalk east of the main entrance is not going to be affected, so that will remain open. The sidewalk obviously through the project limits is going to be closed, and we'll have some pedestrian detours and accommodations, but correct, yes, the sidewalk outside of the radio station east of the project limits will be open. Will the first entrance of the mill be accessible by the radio station, or will that be blocked with construction equipment? So there will be construction activity coming in and out, but the intent is to keep that open. Obviously, there's some parking area there for the leasing office and whatnot. So that entrance area will be kept open. There may be periodic, we needing to get construction equipment in and out there, but the intention is to keep that open. It'll just be closed beyond that parking point, that parking area, so that we can perform all of the necessary construction activities. Will there be any concern for tenants living close to the site of construction in building 4 of the mills? I'm not familiar with the building numbering. I'm assuming you mean like the main mill closest to the wall. The contractor is going to be required to work within that area and obviously avoid any impacts to the mill itself. Beyond that, I'm not, that we don't have concerns. It's a tight space, and the contractor will have to exercise necessary caution, but we're not planning on anybody needing to move or leave if there's unit owners or tenants rather located on that side of the mill. Anything they should be aware of. I'm not sure. We're still a good ways. We're still a good ways out from construction, like we said earlier, 2026. we anticipate there's going to be further communications and coordinations with the property manager, and they can hopefully disseminate all the information that the residents are going to need, information you're going to need to know on how you as tenants may be affected throughout construction. So we'll try and keep that line of communication open. Any more questions? I think we've got everything that's currently active.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like the Q&A has slowed down, so I guess we'll do a last call for Q&A in the chat. Again, you can have questions submitted. I'll try and scroll back to that screen really quickly, for email and phone. So if something comes up after the meeting concludes, feel free to submit a question or a comment via one of those options. Oh, one more question. You had a survey on the last slide. Can you post the link in the chat? I believe it did get posted earlier, at right at the top of the meeting. It's the CT https://portal.ct.gov .ctdot or /ctdot survey. It should be in the chat. If not, I can scroll back. There you go. Okay. Well, that seems to be all of the questions that we have. Oh, something else pop up? Nope. So that seems to be all the questions that we have. I don't see anything else in the chat. So if there are no more questions, we can wrap up our meeting, and thank you all for joining us. If you need anything else, feel free to submit a question via email or leave a voicemail on the phone number that was provided. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.